there should be a chat box function or the Q&A button, and all of the panelists will be able to see your questions. And just a quick overview of how we're going to approach the next hour and a half. The first 40 minutes, we're going to have a moderated panel with the organizers from the Mama's Day Bailout. And then the last 40 minutes, we're going to have a policy discussion around the struggles to end money bail. And we'll definitely have two separate Q&A sections for each portion. So I am going to start by introducing Arissa Hall. So she's the project manager at the Brooklyn Community Bail Fund and one of the core organizers of the Mama's Day Bailout. So Arissa.
Hi, Christina.
Hi.
How are you?
Good, thank you. So I guess you can tell us a little bit more about why bail reform and the actions that took place around bail reform were so important, and kind of give an overview for folks who are not familiar with the bailout that happened for Mother's Day, a brief description, and whatever else you'd like to share with folks.
Yeah. So just as a brief overview, the Mama's Bailout Day was a nationally coordinated effort of about 15 cities, specifically to bail out Black mothers and caregivers before Mother's Day. So it predominantly took place from May 8th to May 12th, and just allowing mamas to be free to live and also be with their families for Mother's Day, which specifically came out of a convening hosted by Color Change and Movement for Black Lives. And we were able to bail out over 100 mothers with the help of just so many supporters and folks who donated. And we were able to raise, specifically from individual donations, around over $700,000 from individual donors and over $1 million generally. And this action was so important just because bail reform is definitely something that folks are talking about, and bail in general, when thinking about mass incarceration, is one of the biggest barriers to liberation, and also one of the main reasons for pretrial detention, as most folks are in jail because of their inability to pay bail.
Thank you so much. So next, we are going to be talking, actually, before we hop on to the next person, are there any common challenges that you saw throughout this process?
Yeah, I mean, there were many common challenges. I think one of just the challenges to bail itself is the fact that it's very complex, and bail, the systems for bail differs based on where you are. So like in New York, for example, it's different, like paying bail in New York than it is in like Philadelphia. And I think like part of, as being one of the core organizers of this bailout and coming from the National Bail Fund Network and Brooklyn Community Bail Fund, was just like doing a feasibility study and really understanding the nuances of bail, which I think is just like intentional to like, again, another barrier for liberation and freedom for folks. And part of that feasibility study, and when I say feasibility, I mean just like how does bail work in your specific area? Like, can you pay bail if you have a felony or if you owe child support? Is there a limitation? So in New York, for example, there's a limitation. So me as Arissa Hall can only pay up to 2 bails a month. And then I would have to be like a registered like bond agent. But that's different in Connecticut, for example. So like, especially in doing a national coordinated action, like being able to understand like how bail works, how can we pay bail efficiently and for large amounts of people in a very short amount of time. And that's why the feasibility study was like very important, to just understanding like how the system works and recognizing that the system is set up to be really challenging for folks. And that was part of the challenge, just like recognizing that in some places, like there's not even like public defender systems as there is here in New York, and we rely a lot on public defenders and also other allies to help us like locate mamas and identify people to bail out. And if you don't have public defenders and like you don't have access to like the system, that was another challenge. And so yeah, like the biggest, I think what I saw as like the biggest challenges were just the jurisdictional differences and being able to navigate that, as well as just like not having a lot of support, like state support as well.
Thank you. And I know that you mentioned the feasibility study. Is that out yet, or is there somewhere that people can find it?
We have, so with the National Bail Fund Network, we have a few guiding questions, a feasibility questionnaire that we give to folks that are interested in starting a bail fund. I can share it with you, and you can get that out to folks that are participating today as well.
Definitely. Thank you. So now we'll go to Erica Perry, who is the co-director of the.
Hey, how y'all doing?
Good. So Erica, tell us about how you planned the Mama's Day bailout in Memphis, and what were some powerful takeaways from the action and challenges and lessons learned.
Yeah, just shout out to Mary Hooks and Arissa and Marguerite for holding it down for us and leading in that. So we started out, we met with a couple of attorneys, a couple criminal defense attorneys, and then a civil rights attorney to kind of get a landscape of how bail works. And then we talked to Josh Spickler, who is the executive director of Just City, which is like a criminal justice reform organization and they also have a charitable bail fund. And so we talked to them and to kind of understand how bail works, what some of the some challenges might be, and then from that we started to get to work. I think one of our major challenges was finding people, and then because we were trying to work with pretrial services, and then the court clerks. And all of them said they couldn't work with us. And then we hit up the PD's office, and they couldn't, they wouldn't be able to help us either formally. And so what we did, we had to figure out how the jail system and the court system works. And so we looked through that, did some research, trying to figure out their process. We found a couple of people, and then we went and met with those people. And through that, we spoke to their attorneys. And so their attorneys were also able to say, hey, I have some more people who you might be able to help out. And so once we kind of got the ball rolling, it was a little bit easier, but it took a second to figure that out. As far as challenges, I think the challenges along with finding people was also we were like, hey, we can't spend over about $10,000 per person. And so some of the challenge was a lot of folks were in there for like $30,000, $21,000 bail. We had one person who really wanted to bail out, but her bail was like $21,500, and these were just for traffic violations. And so that was a little bit disgusting to know this person was locked up for something like that. And that was the case for a lot of people. And I can keep going. No, go ahead.
I don't know if you have like one other takeaway, and then you can also say, are there any next steps that y'all are taking around bail in Memphis?
Yeah. So just another lesson was that it became apparent to us a couple of days into like our bailout week that the state was more interested in locking people up than actually treating like real issues. For example, one of the people we bailed out was dealing with a mental illness, and so we were like, hey, one, being in jail like made her illness worse, and then like coming out of it, it was more difficult for us to find some treatment centers and find places that would hold her. And then we had another case where a person was dealing with domestic violence. And so there was nothing to hold her either because of where she was. And so, can y'all still hear me okay? Okay. And so then where we are now is right after our Mother's Day homecoming, the next day we had a press conference where we told and we sent letters to like the chief administrative judge, the district attorney, the county commissioners, and city council, asking to meet with them because we wanted to work to abolish money bail. We didn't exactly use that language, but we said, hey, we want to meet with you about decreasing the way we use money bail and using alternative ways. And so a couple of county commissioners reached out. One we worked with in the past, he said, hey, let's meet. We don't think the district attorney will meet with us. She actually was supposed to meet with Jeff Sessions today, so that kind of tells you what we're dealing with. So that's where we are. And then we're working on our bail reform campaign. And so just one of the most powerful pieces was how excited and hopeful and the love that people felt in the bailout. And so while we weren't able, so during our welcome home our welcome home team was out waiting for folks to get out. And so in that, the way that people were coming out, they were so excited and so grateful and then ready to plug into the work also. And then folks we didn't even bail out were like, yo, this is so sweet. We appreciate y'all. And so just this sense of community and this sense of coming together was absolutely beautiful.
Thank you. And is there any way that folks can support your work?
Yeah, they can like us on the official Black Lives Matter Memphis page. That's where we'll be giving updates after we come out of our meetings with the county commission and see what they can do. We think that what we want to push them to do is try to, at least for misdemeanors, right, abolish bail. And so after we come out of that, we'll know kind of a little bit, we'll know who our targets are and how we should be pushing them after we finish up figuring out how the DA is going to move and the county commission and the chief judge is going to move. So yeah.
Thank you, and thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you so much. I appreciate y'all.
All right, so next we're going to talk with Serena Sebring. She is the regional organizer for Southerners on New Ground in North Carolina.
Hey, folks.
Hi. So, how did the bailout go down in North Carolina? And I guess the same thing, were there any important lessons and challenges? And what did you find most powerful about the action?
Yeah, for sure. So always big shout out to Mary Hooks for a brilliant idea that lit us all up. So we had begun conversations about our opposition to money bail as a regional organization shortly after the first of the year, and decided that this would be a great way to raise awareness about this. And so what we saw across the region was folks in different sites. So here in Durham, in Charlotte, in Little Kinston, North Carolina, that has 20,000 people in it, in Charlottesville, Virginia, as well as in Atlanta, and some of the larger areas doing bailouts across the region. And some of the challenges that we ran into right away have been named to a certain extent, but yeah, finding people. We could all look on the jail websites and see lists of, who's a Black woman and who's in, but we also wanted to know, were they caregivers, and most specifically, did they want to come out? So gaining some kind of consent and some sort of like connection to family that we could link up with on the other side was really important for us. One of the ways that we dealt with that was through letter writing. So we wrote letters in Durham. We wrote letters in to the Durham County Jail about 2 weeks before bailout day, and we're able to get letters back from about 12 folks who said that they wanted to be bailed out and could give us some information about what resources they might need on the other side. But as we know, the jail population changes every day. So even though our letters got there were people who came in after those letters, and for those folks, we were really just so grateful to some local clergy who agreed to go in and do some of that communication with folks on the inside in the days leading up to our bailout. In the end, in Durham, we wound up bailing out 14 mamas. In Charlotte, they bailed out 6 mamas, and in Kinston, they bailed out 5 mamas, which was a little, I mean, a challenge for any town of 20,000 people to come together, and especially on such a tight time frame. But also, their system just works a little bit differently. So they had identified through letter writing and other forms of communication some women that they wanted to bail out, and by the time bailout day came, they were all gone. So they were not content to just be like, well, okay, we just won't be bailing anyone out. They actually went to surrounding counties, just on tour around North Carolina, freeing Black mamas on that day. It was beautiful, and we all left, you know, really inspired about the ways that local context can shift what's possible for these kind of actions. I think another thing I would say about our next steps is that we are beginning to, in the sites that did bailout, circulate petitions, gaining and sort of continuing the agitation for around money bail as a system, looking at sites where we can run anti-bail campaigns. So one way that folks can support is just to be on the lookout for those petitions coming at you, sign them. And then I think another really important piece of the work that we are learning about every day now is what kind of support systems our mamas have needed on the other side. And really the horrible and sad, sorry state of our local resources in terms of homelessness, in terms of addiction support, substance support, in terms of mental health care, even in terms of physical health care. So our mamas were in there, you know, mostly for very low-level charges, which of course we know they hadn't been convicted of. But on the other side, what it reveals is that the services for people who live in poverty in our communities are missing. There were literally no beds, no shelter beds for our mamas to go to, the ones who did not have homes. And so we're working fairly intensely with about 4 of our 14 mamas who came out with some other challenges around homelessness. One of our mamas just went into a rehab center for a heroin addiction. So we're really you know, pleased to see that we have been able to connect, but it's taken a huge team of people, and it's a system that I don't know how people could possibly hope to navigate individually. So I think the lessons that we're learning on this side of the bailout actions have everything to do with our practice of abolition. You know, we believe in a world without cages, and we know we are not in a world right now where those cages are not serving purposes and filling gaps that other things aren't there for. So coming together and really problem solving some of those things has been a huge lesson that we're continuing to walk out.
Great. And sorry, I'm unmuted. Okay, so what was the most touching piece of the bailout for you personally?
So one morning, this was the second morning of the bailout. So we bailed out 14 mamas over 3 days. And I was joining my coworker, Jade Brooks, in the magistrate's office where she was literally counting out $20,000 in 20s. And there was a mama on the other side of the petition of the magistrate that she was speaking to. And we just sort of overheard some of the situation that was going on with her. And I poked my head around to say what we were doing and see if we could help. And it turned out that she was there with her little 3-year-old daughter, Black woman, you know, late 20s, early 30s, was there. Her daughter was just playing around, and she had just been told that she was going to be placed under immediate arrest. An officer had come to her house to tell her she had a failure to appear warrant, and she had come to the magistrate's office hoping to work that out. But without a lawyer, what they were going to do was take her into custody immediately, and she had nowhere for her daughter to go and no way to make bail. And so in that moment, when I introduced myself and told her what we were doing, she just burst into tears and was so grateful and asked, could we take her daughter during the process. And so I got to hang out with sweet little baby Micaiah for just a couple hours while she went through the process. And they got to go home together that day. And I just, every time I think about that story, it moves me so much, because I know that on the other side of that cell, had she not had someone to bail her out, she could have lost that sweet baby. She could have lost her job, her apartment, her car, all within a very short amount of time. And so to be able to just have the great fortune of being in the right place at the right time with the right resources meant that this situation turned out really differently. Instead, we sugared up Micaiah and gave her some balloons and played some video games with her, and she was ready to meet her mama on the other side. And that was exactly the kind of vision that I was hoping for, and instead it was real.
Thank you so much for sharing that. All right. So next we're gonna go to Reverend Kenneth we're gonna go to Tarsha Jackson out of Texas Organizing Project.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing great.
Well, so we're gonna jump right into it. If you can describe how the bailout went down in Texas, and also how it played a role in the larger work that you're doing in Houston.
Yeah. Well, so bail reform has been like a major issue, a major fight for us here in Harris County. On any given day, you have 8,600 people going through our Harris County jail, and 600 to 800 of those are in there pre-trial, and because they more than likely can't afford bail. And on any given day, you know, our county is spending over $500,000 to operate our county jail system. So it's been a big fight. And so, not to mention that, you know, we've been a part of a lawsuit. We had a federal judge come down and actually ruled that our bail system is unconstitutional, and our local leaders have continued to appeal this lawsuit, and just recently the Fifth Circuit Court actually put a stay on the Harris County injunction, which would have allowed our sheriff to go ahead and implement these the policy recommendations by releasing, you know, a lot of people that's in jail on misdemeanors. And so, of course, you know, this bail out day was like really instrumental in, you know, just keeping the issue on the forefront of the need to really address the system. So basically what we did in Harris County, we partnered with our sheriff's department, their entry team, and we also partnered with our public defender's office. Our public defender basically sent out emails to his other PDs to help, you know, to try to identify women that would benefit from this program. At the same time, we worked closely with, like I said, the Sheriff's Department re-entry team. We went inside the Sheriff's Department, inside the jail, and we spent like 3 days actually in the jail doing assessments on women that would possibly, you know, benefit or to participate in the mother bailout. We recruited over 10, we had 10 volunteers who also went into jail as well. To assess these women. However, I mean, we went through over, like I said, 2,000 women, and, you know, it was really challenging to identify women that we were able to help once released, because there wasn't, like everyone else said, there wasn't like really any resources in the community to help these women, you know, get back on their feet, such as, you know, because quite a few of them are homeless, and you had quite a few of them suffering from substance abuse problems. You know, mental illness. One of the ladies that we bailed out she was actually in jail for 15 days on a $1,500 bond. We bailed her out, but only to get out and realize that she was suffering from schizophrenia. And so we had to, the very next day, get her admitted into a mental health facility. So even though we had the support inside with, you know, system stakeholders such as the sheriff, it was still a challenge because our jails not only was dealing with high bail amounts, but there's another issue with, you know, people that have underlying mental health issues and substance abuse, and there's not any services out in the community to support these women. Overall, you know, like I said, the program, it was very successful in my book, because it actually shed some light on another issue that we need to begin addressing. But at the end of the day, you know, we were able to get some women out, and we're looking forward to, you know, continuing this project.
And are there any next steps that folks can support you with?
So the next steps, like when we bailed the women that we're dealing with, so we went to court. Some of our volunteers went to court with them, and they got serious pushback from their public defender. And so we recently reached out to some pro bono attorneys that's going to come in and provide them with legal counsel, because right now they don't have adequate counsel. We also working with a young lady who had substance abuse. We finally got her into a center earlier part of this week, to where she's now getting some help. At the same time, we have one that she lost her job and she's about to get evicted. So we're, providing her with support to kind of get her back on the feet and getting her signed up with her unemployment. So basically, it's just continuing to, kind of look at what services are needed in the community, and educating our membership base so that we can continue to advocate for what's actually needed, not just bail reform, but services to help these women once they are returned back into their respective communities.
Great. And what did you have any particular moment in the bailout where that touched you, or left you laughing?
The one was with the young lady with the mental illness. When we sat down and we spoke with her, she basically she was just, she didn't seem like she had a problem, that there was any mental concern. And she just said that God was hugging on her. And when he hugged her, he hugged her hard, and he don't let go. And she told me to continue doing what I'm doing. And so when we got her out, she went the very next day and spoke before Commissioner's Court and told her story. And you still would have never known that she was suffering from schizophrenia. And after she finished speaking, that's when it was revealed that she had a mental condition. And our staff got together and we started doing some research and talking with with Harris County, and basically found out that she's been sitting in jail all this time and had not been receiving any treatment. She fell through the crack. And so for me, it was like, if we didn't go in there and didn't talk to her, then she would have probably just been sitting there with no mental health treatment. And so it was for me, and she was open to getting mental health treatment. Normally people, fight it off, but she walked into that facility and she, did not complain not one bit. She was open to it. And so that was rewarding for me, and not just me, my staff, the membership, that we were able to, catch one of those women or people that's falling through the crack every day. That was just one. So it's a whole lot more out there that we can get to, and that was just encouraging and empowering for our team.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And now we're going to go to Pastor Kenneth Glasgow, though he's with the Ordinary People Society in Alabama. Hi, Pastor.
Hey, how y'all doing? Okay, so this is Pastor Glasgow. So the bailout was very, I learned so much. First of all, I learned more of the struggle that women have and all that. We've been running a halfway house. I don't like to call it a halfway house, transition house. We don't do nothing halfway for the longest for women, about 5, 6 years. We've been running it for men, maybe 10 to 13 years. But I learned much more than I ever did by bailing women out, because I learned their struggle. So we bailed out about 22, something like that, 27 all over the state, but 22 in our particular hometown, Dothan, Alabama. And what ended up happening was I identified about 4 or 5 that I knew that was in there because of me being a preacher and all that. I could go in and out at will, and I pretty much keep up with that. So that wasn't a problem for us in Dothan. Wasn't a problem too much in Montgomery, because we had help with Marbury and Arissa had got in touch with the public defender's office, and they gave us a list. A lot of them didn't check out, but some did. In Birmingham, we ran into a lot of different problems trying to identify women to bail out, because no one wanted to give up their names and all. And then we just, I used the preacher status, and we just got some names. And Kara McClure, she turned around and kept, she was so persistent, and she got the names and she got them out. I left and went to Dothan and started down there. When I started down there and I had identified those 4 or 5, we got those out. My daughter jumped on board with me, and she put it on Facebook. My daughter just put it on Facebook We're bailing women out for Mother's Day. If anybody know any mothers, I'm talking about her inbox just immediately filled up with all these different people wanting to get bail. I'm down there trying to check out if they fit the criteria and all. And while doing so, mothers just start calling me to turn themselves in. I didn't actually know that process. As much as I've been dealing with the criminal justice system, I got to be very honest. I didn't know the process of turning yourself in. I got to figure out whether it's a cash bond, whether it's a regular bond, or whatever. And it turned out to be all cash bonds. So we had this flow of women just start turning themselves in that have been running for years. And when we asked them, why are you running and all that, you just got traffic tickets. And they have been running for years, lost their license. But if they get caught, they lose their house, they lose their children, they lose their job, they lose everything. And so I'm like, well, how y'all been surviving, you know, with no ID, no this, no that, and they've been getting loans. They've been going to these different loan companies and just getting all these loans, and then pay them off at the first of the month when they get their checks and their food stamps. So I actually learned, and it humbled me, how single moms been out there surviving without putting themselves on the street for sale. And I was like so amazed at this, how they've been, you know, just taking care of themselves like that. So we got to keep some of their children. The process got so repetitious that in the city jail, you know, they was processing them like in 30 to 40 minutes. They was out. They was in and out, in and out, in and out. And the county jail, it took a little bit longer, but then we had to start setting up services for them. Now, luckily, we had the house, but the house, we ran out of beds. So we had to try to make more room to try to have them. Some of them are still with us now. I got like 6 of them that are still with us now. And in Alabama, it's real catchy because even though these are cash bonds, they put the money toward their fines. And they add to them this community service they got to do, these classes they got to do if they drug charges or domestic violence charges. And some of them got to do parenting classes if they got children. Even though it's not child endangerment or nothing like that, these are the caveats that they add to them with their cash bonds, even if they get out. So we are able to provide those services and get those services for them. So it was just a heck of an experience for me on that part. Like somebody I heard earlier, I'm part of the group with Center for Policy Change that helped sue 3 cities in Alabama. That's Montgomery, Dothan, and Clanton, where we took out the bail bonds for indigent people. But I had no idea that these many people were on the run for cash bonds and would not turn themselves in. Single moms would not turn themselves in like that. So it became phenomenal for me and just really transitioned me. And I got an ultimate new respect on women and how they take care of themselves and their children.
Thank you. And is there any way that we can support the work that you're doing in Alabama? And are there any next steps that you're trying to take?
Oh, yeah, most definitely. We got next steps as far as doing all the classes that they need to do. As far as the housing, we're trying to set up more housing. We, like Tasha over there in Texas, we got one that we had to put immediately. She went to, BMU, which is behavior mental unit in the hospital, stayed 3 days, and then we recovered her back and put her in the house and all. We had to go and recover her dogs and all this kind of stuff and her children, who she hadn't seen in 43 days and all. She didn't know where they was at. So the next steps are to make sure that all of them get their classes. I got 6 of them that need their classes. We got 4 of them, 5 of them, I think. I don't know, 5 or 6, they got to go to treatment, drug treatment. That's mandatory because you got CROs, court referral officers down here that even if you pay your fines, even if you finish with all the courts, if you don't finish those classes, they can lock you back up. And we're fighting that as well. But until we win that, they still could get locked back up just for not doing these classes or for not finishing their community services. So we're providing all these services for them. And, we have reached back out to the National Bail Fund to help us with these services because we got to finish this off with these women for these services. There's a very good article that went out. I forget who wrote it. One of them will tell you who wrote it. And for those of you that want to help us and learn what we have been doing and continue to help us and what we are doing, you could just go to the Ordinary People Society.org and look at the work we're doing and all that. We will be sending out a report because it affected me so much with the life of single moms. It just really affected me so much. We're going to make up a report on the transitioning of a man and looking at the life of a woman's struggle. And that's something I'm going to do, just taking up on myself, because I was just very impressed at how these mothers were taking care of themselves and was on the run. You know, you always see a guy that's on the run and a fugitive and all that, but you got these women that are single moms running like that for years on traffic tickets and bad checks and stuff. That just was amazing to me, how they've been taking care of themselves and all.
Thank you so much, Pastor. So we are now going to open it up to questions from the participants. So if you have any questions, you can put it in the Q&A box. We already have one from Nino in Madison, Wisconsin, basically bringing up the challenge between investing in setting up bail funds and knowing that you are at the same time putting money into the system that is incarcerating us. So I'm going to pass it to Arissa, if you want to speak to that question.
Yeah, thanks, Christina. Yeah, so his question basically around like support in the system, which is like a question that we grapple with and that folks grapple with all the time in bail funds. His question was also specific to being in Madison, because he says that when you pay the bail, it goes to like fees and restitution and all kinds of other things, kind of like what Pastor Glasgow was mentioning. And I think that there is ways to navigate that. Like there's a bail fund in Minneapolis, and they also is supposed to, when bail is returned, it's supposed to go to like back to the defendant. There's other places that go to the fees. In certain places, if you speak to like the judges or the magistrates or the public defenders, when starting a bail fund, if you are working with a public defender, which most folks do, they can advocate to have the money returned to you. But again, like it depends on the system and the judges as well. And I know Erica can also speak to this. Like in Memphis, it's also set up that way, and like the judges have a lot of power, so they can like decide whether or not they will give the funds back to you. But it is again like going to like establish relationships with public defenders. And just like doing research and figuring out whether or not like it can be possible, but it can be possible because there are bail funds in places where it is set up that way, where you can still get your funds back in order to revolve. But I think that's like a really good question, a really important question. And I think in also grappling with like paying bail back to the system, like we want to liberate our people, and that's like more essential. And so yeah, that's more essential than like, and I think like that's a question that needs to be grappled with, but it's more essential. It's just like the immediate, like we want our people out of cages. And then afterwards we can also figure out like how to navigate this and also fight how messed up the system is and how we also contribute to it in different ways.
Thank you. I don't know if anybody else would like to speak to that. Yeah. Okay, so we are going to transition to the second portion. So Marbre is going to take over moderating. So definitely, if you have any questions for the remaining time, put it in the chat box. Oh wait, actually, I have one last question from Michael. It says, does anybody have a sample bail fund program they can share? They're looking to start one in Cobb County, Georgia.
I think I can take that one as well. So, I mean, there's many sample bail funds or bail fund models that you can look to across the U.S. There, especially like revolving funds, there's more than about 12 revolving funds throughout the U.S. I specifically work at Brooklyn Community Bail Fund, which is the largest revolving fund, but there's bail funds that take on very different models, from revolving to movement-based funds to like in-between funds that have like very different kinds of models. If folks want to learn more about bail funds, they can go on our website, which is brooklynbailfund.org, and under National Bail Fund Network, you'll find ways to contact us, and we offer like technical assistance to folks, and just strategic thought partnership and thinking about starting a bail fund, and also the feasibility sheet that we spoke about earlier, just seeing how feasible it is, and just like the processes to navigate in your jurisdiction to start a bail fund in your area as well.
Thank you. All right, Marbury.
Great. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Christina, for holding that. And thank you. And a shout out to Song and Mary Hooks, as well as everyone else on the panel, Arissa and Brooklyn Bail Fund, for all the work, and the over 15 organizations who are part of this incredible effort to bail folks out. It was a really incredibly inspiring thing to be a part of. So thank you all so much. So we're going to shift a little bit from a conversation about this action to kind of what can we do to actually abolish and end these systems. So as folks have talked about, money bail is an essential part of the ecosystem of mass incarceration. And in fact, of the over 2 million Americans who are locked up, 40% of whom are Black and brown or Black, about 600,000 of them are there in local jails. And many of them are there because they haven't been convicted of any crime, but simply because they cannot afford to pay bail. And bail is actually not only a way to keep folks in cages, but it also is a way to force folks to plea bargain. I mean, so what we see is over 98% of folks in this system actually don't have a trial. There's no actual judgment of whether they committed a crime, but instead they, because they're forced to be in a cage, take a plea bargain. And so a lot of folks across the country are using money bail as an entry point to think about how we actually end these systems of modern bondage that keep over 2 million Americans in cages and over 4 million Americans under governmental control through probation and parole. And also, as it was mentioned, these are systems that cost U.S. taxpayers extraordinary amounts of money, and also profit corporations who make huge amounts of profit off of our bodies, our labor, and off of the folks who are incarcerated, from prison fees, as were mentioned, to private telephone calls, to private companies that serve food and healthcare in these facilities, that over and over again we see this ecosystem of profit. And so we're going to spend the next half an hour or so talking to some folks across the country who are doing amazing work from policy, advocacy, and litigation to really try and stop modern day bondage, and do that through ending money bail as kind of a first step. So I'm super excited to welcome Alec, Scott, and Taina, who are all doing work across the country around bail. I'm going to ask each of y'all to introduce yourselves briefly and talk a bit about what work you're doing to end money bail and how it fits into a larger goal of really ending modern day bondage. I'm going to start with Taina.
Okay, hi everybody. Yes, I'm Taina. I'm with SC Justice Group based here in Oakland, California. And I've been working with SC on the bail reform effort that we have here. So in California, really it's like a two-pronged approach that we're working on right now. Like one, we have 2 legislative bills that are moving through the legislature right now that would not end money bail once and for all, but take a huge chunk out of it and really dramatically reduce our reliance on the money bail system. But 2, we're working with a statewide coalition of dozens of base building organizations across the state to kind of lead the more long-term effort to end money bail, even outside of the legislation.
Great, thank you so much, Taina. And next I'm going to go to Alec.
Hi, thanks, Marbury. I'm Alec. I work at a nonprofit civil rights organization in Washington, D.C. called Civil Rights Corps. And we've been, can you hear me all right? Okay, yeah. And we've been working all over the country, probably in about 20 or 25 different cities that we've sued over their use of money bail to put people in cages prior to trial. And we've had tremendous success all over the country, from Ferguson to Alabama, Mississippi. I saw that Kenny mentioned earlier, Pastor Glasgow, the great work that was done in Dothan and Montgomery and Clanton. I'm proud to say that we are involved in each of those cases. We've done work in Chicago, in Harris County, Texas, which is the most recent victory that we had, California, Missouri, Massachusetts, it goes on and on, Tennessee. And basically what we do is we go to these local jurisdictions and we find people that are organizing against mass human caging and who are working on local campaign efforts around issues like money bail, fines and fees, debtors' prisons, these issues generally around human bondage. And we partner with them. We identify human beings and families who are suffering from these issues, and we file really rigorous, detailed federal court cases that try to tell a different story about what our criminal injustice system is and what it does to people and their families. And so in each of those cases, we partner with both local groups on the ground and increasingly larger national organizations and coalitions. And so all of this work is designed both on the local level and the national level to resensitize our society to what a brutal thing it is to do, to put a human being in a cage, and to ensure that if we're going to do it at all, it's only done in the most narrow and limited and exceptional circumstances. And that certainly does not include because a person cannot make a monetary payment.
Thank you so much, Alec. And now to Scott.
Yeah, thanks. Want to definitely appreciate Law for Black Lives for having myself co-change on. My name is Scott Roberts. I'm the Senior Campaign Director for Criminal Justice Campaigns at Color of Change. We are the nation's largest online organizing group working on issues affecting Black communities. For us, the work on money bail really started with the Sandra Bland, the death of Sandra Bland in the Waller County Jail in Texas, close to where Tarsha does her work in Harris County, and I know was also an instigator in their focus on bail reform in the Houston area. But for us, we were looking for ways to stop this type of thing from happening, where folks are dying in jails. And as we looked closer, one of the things we did was raise money from our members to send a private investigator to Waller County. And what we got back from that investigator was a really disturbing portrayal of the bail system and how that contributed to Sandra Bland's stay in the Waller County Jail and ultimately her death. So as we looked into it more and more, we saw that, in addition to the violence that people experience in jails, the costs are really astronomical to folks, especially to Black folks. So it became a focus of ours to try and address it. And we're employing a few strategies I'll just touch on briefly. I think have an opportunity to elaborate on how we're pursuing them as we go forward. But really important for us is exposure. We found that folks don't have an understanding of what bail is or how it works. And we want to expose the cost of bail to our communities, as well as basically the villains in the story, the bail industry, political decision makers like prosecutors, judges, legislators, who are enabling this type of suffering from folks, especially Black folks, through bail and pretrial detention. Some of the ways that we've been trying to address that is like shifting the narrative. We've published a report on the bail industry. We provided the kind of communications and digital infrastructure for the bailout days because we knew that it was such a compelling idea coming out of song and being implemented by folks on the ground. We want to make sure that folks are seeing it and we're taking that opportunity to educate people about bail and the need for reform. But in addition to exposure, just really briefly, we are focused on making key interventions in legislative efforts. So, for instance, working with local organizers to block some negative bill legislation that was moving in Maryland, where some mostly Black legislators were supporting it, and understanding those are folks we had leverage with. Also looking to collaborate with folks like the ESSE group in California, where we're collaborating on a petition, giving hopefully expanded exposure of the storytelling coming from the ESSE members who are folks, women impacted by mass incarceration, particularly their family members that are incarcerated. And we want to make this a political litmus test for elected officials and politicians so that they understand there's a positive incentive and a reward for supporting bail reform, but also there is a cost to pay for standing in the way of it, and using exposure of the industry to draw a wedge between politicians and the industry. And finally, we want to exact a business cost from the industry, looking at ways to isolate companies that are involved in money bail, looking for ways to cost them money on the business side, whether it be bail or other businesses that they're engaged with. So yeah, those are kind of our focuses, and look forward to digging into it more.
Thank you, each of you, for your work and that brief explanation. So I'm going to just ask each of you a series of questions. I'm going to start with Scott. I know you all do work at the state and the local and the national level on ending money bail. And I'm curious, kind of, what are the specific obstacles that you see come up over and over again? And specifically, can you talk about the bail bonds industry and influence on money bail and its communication?
Yeah, I think, as we started to enter into these efforts for bail reform, that, we certainly aren't the first folks to try and move this issue. What we saw as one of the challenges to the entire field of folks working on this was that the bail industry is incredibly influential. They spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on political contributions and lobbying, but more importantly, they're really well ingrained with certain types of decision makers, like judges in particular. And so they just have a ton of influence, especially at the local and state level. Folks like Tanya at SE and in other places like Connecticut, Maryland can attest that they really show up when you try to reform the system in a major way. So for us, we wanted to, as I was saying earlier, make an effort to expose them, make them a toxic industry that politicians won't want to be attached to, so that we can leverage that with decision makers. So yeah, we did this detailed report on the industry. We really wanted folks to understand that the industry is taking over a fundamental role in the justice system, determining who's set free and under what conditions. At the same time, exacting major costs from our communities, not limited to the time that people are spending in jail, but also the incredible, debt trap that they get folks caught into with fees, installment plans, things of that nature, violating people's privacy with surveillance. Want folks to understand that, but even more importantly, we're trying to educate the public around who the industry really is. It's not your neighborhood small business bail bondsman that's really driving this and that's opposing reform in a really effective way. It's a really small number of multinational and national insurance companies, surety bond companies that are backing the industry, getting 10% out of each bond, making somewhere between $1.4 to $2.4 billion a year, off and taking zero risk, doing no kinds of payouts, passing all the risk on to their, quote unquote clients, people who are forced into these relationships with them by our system. So we really encourage folks to check that out on our website. You can just go to colorchange.org, dig into the report. I think we're going to get folks who are on this call will get a follow-up email with some stuff from Law for Black Lives. So I think it's really important to check out and share and understand, identify the industry as like a major obstacle until we can help people understand them as a villain and limit their political power. It'll be very difficult to move forward in a major way.
Thank you, Scott. The next question is for you, Alec, and I'm curious about the cases you've litigated and specifically how bail has worked in those cases and why you've targeted those jurisdictions, and also the impact of your litigation.
So money bail works in virtually the same way in all 50 states. That's changing a little bit now with some of the reforms that have happened in a few states, but virtually around the country, it's very similar. You're arrested for an offense, and you're told you're free to go home to your family and back to your community, but only if you hand them some money on the way out. And so obviously impoverished people and there's different procedures and ways that certain states and cities and counties have tweaked their process, but essentially that's how it works everywhere. And from our point of view, we're trying not to focus so much on the little details in each place and on the broader principle of can a society and a culture justify putting a human being in a cage because she can't make a monetary payment? And it's that story that we're trying to tell in all of our cases, whether it's in New Orleans or in Houston or in Boston or in Chicago or in San Francisco or in Los Angeles. And so what we've tried to do is pick places where there was really strong local organizing and activism around the issue to put some political pressure at the same time that we're bringing our legal cases, to pick places where there were a lot of people held in jail on money bail so that the impact of the individual victory would be significant, and to pick places where we thought that the local advocates could really tell the story. So working with a lot of organizers in Ferguson, for example, and in New Orleans, and a lot of the incredible work that Tarsha and Texas Organizing Project, for example, have done in Harris County, Texas. So our goal is to pick places that have that can have the biggest impact on a local and regional level, but then also on a national level. And so what we've done has been fairly successful so far. I think our cases all over the country have resulted in over 100 cities stopping the use of money bail in misdemeanor cases. We have achieved a number, probably 10 to 15 federal court rulings declaring that the use of money bail to keep human beings in cages when they can't afford it is unconstitutional. Our most recent victory is a really significant one in Harris County, Texas, where a federal judge, the chief federal judge in Houston, ruled that the misdemeanor money bail system, which they apply to over 50,000 human beings every year, is unconstitutional. The other side is fighting back really hard. As Scott mentioned, the bail industry is very powerful and very wealthy. They've hired some of the most famous and most experienced lawyers in the country to fight our cases in Georgia and in Texas and in other places. And we're facing a lot of pushback from local judges and prosecutors in a lot of these places who have, for reasons I have trouble understanding, who are so wedded to this system of mass human caging and exhibit such indifference to the suffering that they're causing that they fight really hard in these cases. And so the victory that we got in Harris County, Texas, for example, is now being appealed to the federal appellate court, which is the stage right before the Supreme Court. So this really will be this coming year when the higher federal courts, including maybe even the U.S. Supreme Court, take up this issue. It'll be a really defining moment for these issues as a legal matter. But I wanted to say something, we get a lot of attention for the legal cases that we're bringing, and we try to do as good a job as we can with them. But I think we all have to be cognizant that these systems of oppression, like money bail, will find ways to reproduce themselves if we don't build the kind of power that's necessary to make sure that what replaces money bail isn't something that is just as bad in other ways. What do I mean by that? For example, in the federal courts in this country, we don't really use money bail, but they use something called preventative detention. So a lot of people, mostly people of color, are actually kept in jail without bail prior to their trial because they're found to be dangerous or a risk of flight or something like that. And there's all kinds of problems with that system too. And there's all kinds of problems with even in places that release a lot of people, they're releasing them with onerous conditions like GPS monitoring, drug testing, all kinds of forms of government control and surveillance over people's bodies. And so we need to make sure that it's not just a superficial fight against money bail, but it's a deeper fight against the ways in which the government controls certain people and certain populations, not just cages them, but controls their lives. And so we want to make sure that when we eliminate money bail, we've actually built real power in these communities so they can say, not only are we getting rid of money bail, but you're not going to put GPS monitors on all of us. And you're not going to make us pay for those GPS monitors. And you're not going to throw us in jail without bail. You're going to release us and you're going to release us into our community, our families. And hopefully you're not even going to arrest us in the first place. You're not even going to police our communities. So I think our work and the work of the partners that we partner with all over the country is really focused on changing the entire conception of what the criminal legal system should be about, and using the money bail fight as just one way of getting people interested and knowledgeable about and engaged in these really fundamental questions.
Thank you so much for that. And Taina, a question for you. I know that SC Group works largely with women who are impacted by these systems. And I'm curious if you can talk a bit about why bail reform is so important for us specifically and the impact of both mass incarceration, modern bondage, and the bail system on women.
Sure, thanks, Marbury. So a couple of years ago, SC Justice Group was part of a coalition of California organizations that created this report called Who Pays the True Cost of Mass Incarceration. And one of the things that we found in that report is that when people have to pay bail and other court fees, 83% of the time, it's actually women who are the ones who are paying those fees. So, not only are women responsible for the ones who are responsible to try and come up with the cost of bail, they are also the ones who take on the financial burdens if you can't bail the person out. So they are the ones who are, taking care of children who are, left alone when their parents are incarcerated. They are the ones who are paying for very expensive phone calls to be able to talk to their loved ones who are incarcerated. They are the ones who, are going into debt and making all of the sacrifices. That report also found that 1 in 4 women in the U.S. has an incarcerated loved one, and almost 1 in 2 Black women have an incarcerated loved one. So the issue of bail, it's a financial issue that disproportionately has an impact on women. And that's not even really taking into full consideration the fact that Black women are the largest growing demographic of incarcerated people. So not only are we the ones responsible for paying bail, we are also the ones who are being incarcerated at the most rapidly growing rate. So, obviously we think that it's really important that women who have bail stories and who have been in the position to attempt to make bail for their incarcerated loved one or even for themselves should be central to these conversations, which is why I think it's so important that SC Justice Group has, taken such an important stance in working on the legislative campaign that we have here in California, and making sure that women are also seen as people who are directly impacted by bail. So a lot of times the context is around, when we talk about people who are directly impacted, we talk about the actual people who are incarcerated, and for the most part, that's men. So this conversation is also really important to highlight the fact that women are directly impacted, even if we're not the ones who are physically in cages.
Thank you so much for that. So Alec, I wanted to ask you a bit about the limitations of litigation as well as the victories you've had, and what ultimately, you touched on this a bit, but what ultimately has to happen to end the money bail system, and not just that system, but the corollary systems of surveillance and other ways that folks are caged even outside of cages.
Well, I think that all of our work is premised on the idea that litigation has really significant limitations. I don't think any of us are deluded. I think you can't rely on the federal courts to create social change. If you look back at the history of the court system in this country, it's a history of creating and perpetuating a lot of the injustices that we're fighting against, right? These systems of property and wealth, the entire criminal law has been used throughout the history of this country to, further reify and solidify distributions of hierarchy, whether it's property, whether it's racial hierarchy, right? So it would be a real mistake to think that we can just waltz into courts and say, courts, we demand that you solve all these problems for us. I think what litigation can do, and I think this is limited but also important, is it can tell stories, and it can provide a particular moment in time in a particular context for getting people's attention. But it's only going to be successful ultimately if working with lawyers, and really lawyers are working for these people. We have organizers and people in the community, people online like Color of Change, people like Essie, building the broad-based public support for radical changes to the way we're doing things in our society. So I think of our cases as only successful to the extent they're done in conversation with a real movement, and they can play a little bit of a role in sparking a dialogue and drawing attention to things. But I don't think we're under any illusion that our cases are going to solve all these problems for people.
Thank you for that, Alec. And Taina, can you talk a bit about the work happening in California? It's been mentioned a few times, but specifically Alan from the webinar asked about the bill numbers. But what does that consist of, and what are ways that folks can support it? But also, to your point, what are the next steps even after a bill like that is passed?
Yeah, sure. So the two bill numbers, we have two bills that are exactly the same thing at this point, but they're moving through both houses of the California legislature. So the one in the Assembly is AB 42, and the one in the Senate is SB 10. Both bills have passed the first policy committees, and the Senate bill, SB 10, actually made it through its fiscal committee today. And the Assembly bill is being heard in its fiscal committee tomorrow. So we're hoping that that one will also make it out and make it to the full floor, and then they will switch over and repeat the same process in their opposite houses. In terms of what the bill would actually do is, the short version of it is it would make release on own recognizance kind of assumed. The discretion would be put in the hands of the judge to determine, whether or not the person, what they need to be able to come back to court based on the results of a risk assessment tool that is still being developed. And we are working as hard as we can on our end as part of this coalition to make this tool least amount of problematic as possible, because we understand like risk assessment tools can have, racist impacts. So we just want to, try and like mitigate that as soon as we can. And then in terms of what folks can do to support these pieces of legislation, if you don't live in California, what you can definitely do is sign the petition that Scott mentioned earlier, the Color Change petition. But if you do live in California, it would be great if you could actually call your assembly member and your senator and let them know that you support SB 10 and AB 42. We also pretty often have been engaging in lobby days. We spent all day yesterday in Sacramento, where about 150 folks from various organizations across the state were there lobbying to support the bills and tried to hit as many members of the legislature as we could.
Thank you so much, Tanya, and for all the amazing work that's gone into making that possible. So we know that reform can happen through litigation, although slowly, also at the state level. But I'm curious, Scott, if you can talk a bit about how it can also happen locally, both through discretionary use by DAs and others, and other ways that it gets addressed, and specifically about the work that Color of Change is doing around pressuring DAs to use their extensive unchecked power to actually limit the use of money bail at the local level.
Yeah, thanks. Let me just briefly say, Tanya, I want to make sure we talk about how Color Change members can be making calls as well. Really excited about that and the progress in California. But at the local level, we've been focusing a lot of our energy around elected prosecutors, most commonly district attorneys in most states. But for us, the district attorneys are really the most powerful people in the criminal justice system. We feel, that in terms of police accountability, sentencing, charges, as folks know, they have a tremendous amount of power. And bail is one of those areas, as some folks have mentioned. We heard from Erica that folks in Memphis are targeting their district attorney to make some different decisions. And we think that they are a pressure point that may be more effective in some cases because they are executives. They have the power to make kind of executive decisions within their offices around how they're going to make recommendations around bail, and they have a lot of discretion that allows them to do that within the law that doesn't require legislation, or litigation simply helps, I think, them along the way. But we want to put the pressure on those folks to make those changes. The limitation, of course, is that they're elected officials, and these types of decisions, they're like executive orders, of a president, for instance. So we know that they are only as good as, they're only as good for as long as that person's in office. And as Alex was kind of talking about, without the power to hold them accountable to it, and to demand transparency and data and things like that, we're limited even when they make the agreement. So one of the things that we're doing is, along those lines, what I was talking about, trying to build up more public and localized pressure on these elected officials from their constituents. So they're not just hearing from, myself, who is a digital campaigner based in Washington, D.C., but they're hearing from Color of Change members and their networks of people that they know in their local communities. So we're working over the next month to launch a series of events that help people build local organizing teams to confront local prosecutors, put pressure on them to shift their positions around bail, asking them to do things like commit to not taking contributions from the industry, to supporting local and state legislation, because those folks, other folks who've worked on these issues kind of test district attorney associations at the state level are very influential on what happens in state capitals in terms of legislation and criminal justice. So their support and buy-in is needed for reform. But most importantly, the things that they can do within their own offices, like making ROR, release on recognizance, the default for prosecutors in their office, so that the inclination is not to use bail, right, or other decisions that they could be making in that sense. So yeah, we really will. Hopefully, folks can be on the lookout for that. And if people are particularly interested in targeting their local district attorneys around bail reform, we'd love to connect.
Dope. Thank you, Scott. I also am curious, I know that you all have done some work at the national level to try and disincentivize money bail locally. Can you talk a bit about that as well?
Yeah, well, we are, like a lot of groups, signed on in support of the No More Money Bail Act, which was introduced by Congressman Ted Lieu for the first time last year. He's based out of the LA area. That bill would incentivize local communities to move away from money bail by restricting access to some federal funds based on that. We do have a petition in support of that bill, really calling on other members of Congress to endorse it. We understand that given the current lay of the land at the federal level, that it's not likely to pass anytime soon, but we believe it's critical to build momentum at the federal level, and that many of the folks that we're trying to push to support in Congress are leaders who I think will become markers and influencers to influence local and state folks. It reminds me, for a brief tangent, of efforts we did around the minimum wage, and how once, especially President Obama backed the minimum wage, we saw more local and state folks on his side of the aisle doing that. And that I think if we can start to see kind of those high profile folks signing on, that would be incredible. And we want to lay the groundwork for, what could potentially be a more, a Congress and potentially even a White House that's more friendly to this. And by getting that buy-in from federal politicians, we feel like, we could be laying the groundwork for real federal change, and the kind of sweeping thing that will allow us to do bail reform at a, national level.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think it's also important to keep in mind that through the 1990s under Clinton, there was huge amounts of incentivization at the federal level to build prisons and put more people in jail. And so think about ways we can use federal power to limit that, I think is powerful despite the landscape. So we have about 5 or 10 minutes for questions. We have a few questions in the queue, but if folks have more questions, you can use the Q&A function on the bottom of your screen. But one question that came up that I think Alec answered really powerfully is around just the reality that some folks who are released may actually go on to commit quote unquote violent crimes or be involved in other behavior that gets them arrested. And kind of how do we, as folks who want to abolish this system, really interrupt that narrative and address that? So Alec, I don't know if you want to just quickly recap what you shared in the kind of text box, then if other folks also have thoughts around that question.
Sure. I just think it's important to note that money doesn't have anything to do with public safety. So in the world where everyone is being released, whether or not just because they can pay, lots of people are committing crimes. Right. I mean, So if you're released just because you have a little bit of money, if anything, that makes you more dangerous, right? And so, if you believe there are people that are extremely dangerous, I don't know why you would release that person just because they have money. So the person asked the question about New Jersey. Well, one of the big scandals in New Jersey for decades has been that people released on bail to bail agents, bail companies, are committing lots of crimes while they're out on release. So just the fact that after we get rid of money bail in New Jersey, a few people are going to commit crimes while they've been released is just a fact of life. And we have to remind people constantly that people were committing lots of crimes when we used money bail, and money doesn't make anyone safer. A second thing we have to note is that just the data shows that it's very, very unlikely that people will commit serious crimes when they're on release. That's another point we need to make. And then third, I think this is something that is commonly overlooked, but that by jailing people because they can't pay money bail, you actually lead to more crime in the future. So the academic research is really strong that even just a few days in jail makes someone more likely to commit crime in the future because you've now destabilized their life. Maybe they've lost their bed at the shelter. Maybe they've lost their job. Maybe they've lost, family relationship. Maybe they've gotten kicked out of school in the time they've been in jail. So there's all these things that happen to people, and increasingly, unfortunately, you've exposed them to crime inside the jail facility. Abuse by guards, lack of adequate medical care. People often go into jail for a few days and they get taken off medication that they've been needing for a long time, and that can lead to certain effects after they get released. So I think you get the point. All of these are really important points to make to someone who tries to say that somehow we're making the community less safe by not caging people because they can't pay.
Yes, thank you for that. Scott or Taina?
Oh yeah, I'd like to just add to that. So first of all, I would second everything that Alec just said. In us doing our lobbying, a couple politicians have brought up that issue, mostly because I think they're afraid of their name being associated with legislation. And then, all it takes is one person to mess it up. But in addition to everything that Alec said, at least with the California legislation, we would be using a tool that would evaluate a person's individual circumstances. So it would actually be like a much more effective mechanism of determining like what the person's needs are to come back to court, what their needs are to prevent them from, causing harm or, committing crimes in the future. So it actually, because it's like more individually based, that it would actually probably like reduce the likelihood that somebody who is released would cause any type of harm. So that's the only thing that I would add to the things that Alex said already.
Thank you, Taina.
Yeah, I mean, if I could just really quickly, I agree with all of that, and I think this is a really great question. Because all of us kind of wanted to jump in and answer it, but I really appreciated the question around the stories, and Alec is right that like these are stories, if you're paying attention, they're really being driven by the industry, and they're finding the most obscure stuff and pushing it out there. And I think, folks are right in that we have to tell the counter narrative. And I just want to lift up that, to me, this is why the bailout day was so important, right? It was a action that wasn't necessarily connected to a single demand, but it was telling the story of what the impact of bail is. So for every time someone thinks about one person who got out and committed a crime, we also have to think about the hundreds and thousands of people being held who don't deserve it, and help people to see who those folks are outside of just considering them as criminals. And I just, we're hopeful that as we continue to push out some of this content, also there's a really dope, incredible video from SE Group. I don't know if we mentioned it, but like with their members telling their stories, it's on that petition page. I'm sure we'll share it with folks. I think those types of interventions are critical, not just to like pushing back on the violence narrative directly, but having our own narrative where we're telling the stories of who people that would be released under reform are, who people suffering under the current system are, and what the cost is to them and their families.
Absolutely. And just to add to that, I mean, on average, it costs $33,000 to put somebody in a cage for a year. And so thinking about the ways, and this was mentioned throughout the bail report backs, but many folks are arrested for crimes related to their mental health or drug addiction. And so what it would actually be if we spend that money not on caging people, but instead on actually addressing some of the root causes that might cause folks to be involved and arrested again, I think is an important thing to think about it both in Houston, and I know that in California as well, there's a real attempt to reroute the incredible amounts of money that are being spent to jail folks to actual supportive services that reduce crime in the long run and actually address some of the roots of mass incarceration and the criminal legal system. So thank you for that question. We have a few more questions and not much time, so I'm going to actually put them out in kind of a cascade and see where we land. One is around the role of deportation in incarceration, and also how often solitary confinement is used specifically. And the last question, which was kind of briefly touched on, is around these risk assessment tools and the ways in which race plays in and is re-legitimized in their use and how they recreate racism. And so I'm going to let Taina, who I know is working on that in California and trying to address the assessment tool question, go first. And then if folks have thoughts about deportation or solitary confinement, we can address those second.
Right. Well, regarding the tools, currently in the legislation, the tools are not spelled out. What it says in the legislation is that a tool will be developed. So what we have been pushing for from the beginning and are continuing to push through in the legislative process is making sure that grassroots organizations are involved in the development of these tools, that we can very specifically talk about what kind of questions should and should not be in there in order to, reduce the amount of racial bias. I think that we all are not naive enough to think that we're going to eliminate racism in these tools, but we're going to do the best that we can. So yeah, we're just going to continue to make sure that we have a seat at the table in developing these tools. But that was a reason that we decided not to go with an existing tool in these pieces of legislation, because we acknowledge that everything that's in existence is problematic in one way or the other. So we want to start from scratch and create something new.
Thank you for that. Alec or Scott, do you have any comments on that? I know that similar work is happening in Philly and across the country, that present tools who ask questions around your criminal record or what zip code you live in, or if you have a home phone, often recreate the systems that we're in. And so super excited about folks who are digging in around thinking through what it actually means to evaluate risk and address it. So the next question was around deportation. I can speak briefly. So part of the bailout, the National Mama's Day bailout, included Baji, who bailed out 2 women who were incarcerated in ICE facilities. And so for deportation offenses, if you're arrested for a deportation offense, which often is something like crossing the border or re-entry, those bails are $10,000, $20,000, even $50,000, and so are very, very high. And what we're seeing under this administration is that often bail is not even granted, or bond isn't granted to those folks, and so folks are being denied even the possibility of bond and just being kept locked up. But part of the bailout day was to really target and talk about the immigration crisis in this country and the way that bail bonds are also used in that context. In terms of local arrest, people are held on bail locally, and they often have to serve time and are tried for local offenses before they're deported. So they are part of this same system. And then I don't know if Alec or Scott or Taina have thoughts on the solitary confinement question before we close out, about the use of solitary confinement in jails.
Yes, it's a big problem that all over the country, everywhere, in jails all over the country, people are held in solitary confinement. And when you're in a jail, there's no distinction made in almost any jurisdiction between people that have been convicted of something and people that haven't. So all of the problems that we see with solitary confinement in jails around the country apply equally to anybody held prior to trial on money bail. And many jails aren't facilities that are built for people to stay there a long time. But you've got a lot of places where people can be held on jail for 1, 2, 3 years waiting trial, and they just don't have the facilities. People go 1, 2, or 3 years without. It's not just solitary confinement. It's just even people not in solitary confinement don't get to see sunlight for 3 years. Because a lot of jails don't even have any outdoor recreation facility. There's all kinds of problems. So yes, everything you've heard about solitary confinement is a big problem in the bail context.
Thank you so much for that. And also just thinking about the ways that solitary confinement adds and aggravates any type of mental illness that folks might have. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that point. And then there are certain populations, I think, that are really impacted at the jail level and pretrial level by solitary confinement, which right now that we have some of the crew from YASP who participate in the bailout in Philly on, because they have been working to push their courts around young women. What they're seeing is that because there's not a separate facility for young women in Philly, they're putting them in the adult jail because there's a small number of like teenage girls being arrested and held, and it's still too many, frankly. But because there's not a place to house them, they automatically put them in solitary confinement. Is what they've said to us when we work together on the ground on other issues. And then, of course, transgender folks, right, like are going to be subjected to a lot of isolation as a way of so-called protecting them, but obviously it's not. It's just not an appropriate way to treat people, and like, as you're saying, can exacerbate already existing issues. So I think that's important to keep in mind when we think about how bail is putting people in that situation of solitary and who those folks are.
Dope. So we are at time. Thank you all so much for sharing your work and for all the incredible work y'all are doing. Just as a quick recap, we're going to send an email out probably on Monday with a bunch of material, including the feasibility study from Brooklyn Bail Fund, the bail industry report from Color of Change, the toolkit around how we did the bail action and suggestions on how you might do something similar, the SE Group petition for the California bills, and resources from Law for Black Lives on how bail reform can happen locally and at the state level as well as the national petition to put pressure on members of Congress to really stop this cruel system and the cages that are locking folks up. So thank you all so much for joining. If folks have questions or thoughts, please email us with them. And thank you all again, the panelists and the incredible folks who threw down in the last few weeks to get people free. So much love.